Good evening. Welcome you here to our midweek Bible study. You might be joining us online, potentially. We get some feedback. I feel it coming to attack me and the audience. That's good. That's good. As usual, we begin with trying to do our best to update the church family as to the things that are going on in the lives of our church family, those connected to us. We got several things to share with you this evening. Eliana Espinoza received the results of her MRI. She has a bone bruise and tendonitis on her shoulder, and she will be resting and doing physical therapy for the next several weeks. Mike Hughes, who is here in the flesh, is seeing some improvements with the infection in his foot, but it will be a bit of a passage of time yet before that healing process is complete. Patrick Hughes had a nerve block in his back today and is doing well, and I think that is that's looking forward to a procedure in the near future. Jimmy Land fell and broke his wrist, and he is now in a cast, and he'll be in that cast for at least 6 weeks. So I want to remember Jimmy. Katie Lee is scheduled to begin a 5-week course of radiation treatments this Friday, September the 29th. So we want to be thinking about Katie throughout all of that. Elisa Parrish remains in Vanderbilt after being diagnosed with pneumonia and sepsis. She has received good news that all cultures have been negative, but her blood pressure remains quite high, and she is to have an MRI done. Lisa still has shoulder and eye surgeries pending and follow-up visits with her providers. Tony Parrish was scheduled for prostate surgery today, and Tony wishes to thank everyone for the acts of kindness and continued prayers, and have not received as yet an update on how that procedure went with Tony. Leon Patterson, this is the father of Mary and Isabel, remains in CVICU at North Alabama Medical Center. Actually, I think Leon might have came home. He came home, and he is doing better. They're certainly going to be watching him, but considering where he was at and where he's at now, I know the family's thankful. Larry Pope had what was believed to be some melanoma removed from his back last week, and he had another surgery just yesterday, I believe, and they go in and remove several layers of skin. The doctor does believe that they were able to get clear margins, but that'll get confirmed either Thursday or Friday on the pathology report. Charlie Shadrick had surgery for a previous leg fracture this morning. The doctor said that Charlie did great, and he is doing well. There is a picture of Charlie chomping on a popsicle that is worth looking at. I'll show it to you. I got the picture on my phone. Stephanie Taylor has been released to walk in a boot. The Taylors like to thank all those that helped with meals for their family over the last few weeks. Deanna Thigpen had to postpone chemotherapy for this week due to a low white blood cell count. It has been rescheduled for Wednesday, October the 4th, so that'll be a week from today. We want to extend our Christian love and sympathy to Thelma McLeod on the death of her husband, James McLeod. James was also the brother-in-law of Dorothy Collins. James passed away Sunday, September 25th, and a graveside service and an interment will be held at Old Etheridge Cemetery this Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m. We also want to extend our Christian love and sympathy to the family of Steve Gandy. Steve was the brother of Mark Gandy. Steve passed away after a long battle with brain cancer, and those funeral services were held today in Columbia. A few reminders. New adult Bible classes will begin this Sunday, and due to a scheduling snafu, the Sunday morning ladies class meeting in the fellowship building will not meet this Sunday, but will meet the following Sunday, October 8th. But there'll still be a class in here, and there'll be a men's class over in the office classroom. The Lions group, that's also this Sunday, will be going to the M-Call, the Murray County area-wide at Sandy Hook Church of Christ. Please meet in the south parking lot at 4:45 p.m. to go to that. Also, this Sunday is Feast at 5:30 p.m. in the fellowship building. And then October the 3rd is the Seniors Ministry Biscuit and Devo, and that'll be at 9 a.m. in the fellowship building. I'll be heading out tomorrow and Friday. I'll be at a lectureship retreat where we'll be populating topics and identifying speakers for lectureship over at East Tennessee School of Preaching, or now the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. And then I am slated to start a gospel meeting in Clarksburg, Tennessee this Sunday. I'll get a chance to speak about 6 times between Sunday and Wednesday. That is where Brittany's granddad is a member. So I'm going to be crashing with him. He's 91 years old. He's a preacher for about 50 years. And I always like to bend his ear. So that's what I'll be up to. Jeremy.
2 things that I want to add. One of those is just a little bit of inspiration for you maybe. I talked about several things coming up and some folks that are dealing with different things. And one of those people mentioned was Deanna Thigpen, who had to have her treatments delayed because of white blood cell counts. Deanna texted me yesterday. Back about a year ago, they signed up for an October Lions activity. I wasn't going to reach out because of all the stuff going on. And I got a text from Deanna yesterday saying that the pumpkin carving activity that we will be hosting will take place the Saturday before the 5th Sunday, when we have a soup and chili lunch and trunk or treat. And I was like, oh my goodness, Deanna is awesome. Sitting there and, dealing with what she is, already planning an activity. So if you don't think you can do something, I think you're wrong. Appreciate you, Deanna. Second thing is that, like last year, we will be participating again in the Lawrence County School System Food Drive. And what we are tasked with purchasing this year are the little rice or noodle packs such as this, or boxed rice boxes, the kind that are really quick and easy to prepare. You can find these on the pasta aisle at Kroger. If you go to Kroger, I don't know where they are at Walmart, probably also on the pasta aisle. But you go on down, if you get in that, coming from the, you walk in Kroger, you go down to the pasta aisle. It's about halfway or so down on the right. You'll find these kinds of things. KNORR is one of the brands. We decided to go ahead and try some out for supper tonight, and it worked out. It was pretty good. So anyway, we will be putting some totes back in the foyer. And throughout the month of October, we will be gathering this stuff. They are able to give provide food for families in need. There are over 1,000 of them that they end up giving out. Last year, they ended up giving out over 1,000. So we are the sole provider of these types of things. So let's make sure that we do our best to provide these. And look forward to being able to help with that opportunity to help families in need in our community again. It's almost time, but let's all stand up. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine all the time. Let it shine, oh yeah. I'm all wrapped up, I'm all tied up, I'm all tangled up in Jesus. I'm all wrapped up, I'm all tied up, I'm all tangled up in God. I'm all wrapped up, I'm all tied up. I'm all tangled up in Jesus. I'm all wrapped up, tied up, tangled up in God. Oh yeah, hide it under a bushel. Nope. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel. No, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine all the time. Let it shine. Oh yeah. Won't let Satan it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine all the time. Let it shine. Oh yeah. You are dismissed to your classes.
How's everybody tonight? All right. Get situated here. Got a pretty good crowd. I was coming over by the fairgrounds earlier this evening, and they had a really big crowd over there. Must be something going on tonight. I think this is must be the night for the drawing or something, because there's a bunch of people up there. But anyway, we had an interesting group last night here, as we've been having. I don't know, somebody said Michael Miller's group may have been one of the first ones to come here to have some chili before they went to the fair, but the Phi Kappas from over at Freed Hardman came through again last night, and I think they had about 125 came through, so that's a pretty neat little deal. Carter's experiencing that this year as a freshman. I know Emily Harris was part of the crowd, so quite a bit of fun going on there. All right, so tonight we're finishing up our study on the patriarchs. That's what we've been doing for the last, I guess, 12 weeks. This will be number 13. Talked to Jacob a little bit. He is going to be in the auditorium for the next quarter, but he will not be here because of that meeting the first Wednesday. So he's going to have somebody fill in, and I think he said his theme was to be or not to be. And he's got a lot of different things tied into that, and will be taking care of this class for the next quarter. Tonight, as we wrap up our discussion on the patriarchs, I got the last one left in the list, and that is Sarah. And I thought this turned out to be a pretty good lesson. I hope I get some things conveyed to you that stick, and we're going to go through a lot of the scripture, kind of just, figure out a little bit about her and what about her life is interesting to us. So one of the things as we get started, that, obviously Abraham is a big part of her story. So I'm trying to be careful and not cover Abraham again. We had him covered a few weeks ago. But that being what it is, there'll be some things I'm sure that are you've heard before, and obviously the story of Sarah is something that we've all heard many times over the years. So a lot of reminders and refreshing on that. The questions I want to kind of ask or answer tonight and use as our guide is, who is Sarah? I just want to cover some bases, kind of understand a little bit about her. What was she like? I think that's pretty important as far as understanding, why she made the list. Why are we studying Sarah in this list of patriarchs? What is she? What was her life about? What makes her the example and role model that she is to us today? Also want to think about what lessons we can learn from her experiences and how we can apply them in our lives. We'll go through the scripture, learn a little bit about her, what the Bible teaches us about her, think about what characteristics she's made of or she was made of, and then again use what can we do to use her in our life. You can't hardly talk about any of these people without turning to Hebrews chapter 11, where we all know is about the hall of faith. What's amazing to me when you think about these people that we've been studying, the list and the notoriety that these people have in the Bible. You think about the list, you start at the beginning, you read through chapter 11, you've got Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. And then you've got what's known as the others or other prophets that are also mentioned. And when you think about that, that's a pretty healthy group of people that are obviously very familiar names to us. Only 2 ladies in the list specifically named. But when you think about that, you just think, wow. What is it about their life? What is it about how they lived in their time that made them make that list? What is it that we can glean from them and learn? Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 11 define faith, and this is all something that we're very familiar of, but I think it's important to cover that, to understand a little bit more about maybe what characteristics these people did have and the things that they exemplified in their living. Verse 1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. So obviously when we think about these people, we think about their faith first and foremost. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. So when you break that down, you understand that faith is that substance of the things that we hope for, the actions in our lives, the way we live, the way we treat others, the way we show our faith when sometimes those things are unseen. It is that evidence that we use, the evidence that we project, the things that we do in our lives that prove when we can't see something that we believe in it. And just as it says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God. There's many people in this world today that don't understand that. They don't believe that. But it takes faith to understand that God said, let it be, and it happened. Now you talk about people that, talk about the Big Bang and the way that this world was created in the universe. And, sometimes I think, well, if God said, make it so, things go crazy. There probably was a big explosion. When God said, let it be, it happened. But when you think about it, these people all used things like that in their life and showed others what it was like to live by faith. When you get to verse 11 and 12, it talks about Sarah specifically. Verse 11 says, by faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him meaning the Lord, faithful, who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, talking about an old Abraham in this case, were born as many as the star of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. So just in a few verses in the book of Hebrews, what we learn about Sarah is it seems like she's got a part of something very special. You know, if you haven't read anything in the Old Testament about her, if you just focused on those few verses in Hebrews, there's something special there. She's going to conceive, bore a child, past the age, and obviously through Abraham, he's going to be blessed, and it's going to be a multitude and innumerable number of offspring and children. So that's pretty interesting. Makes you wonder exactly, you know, what is Sarah all about. Be turning to Genesis chapter 11, where we actually pick up for the first time anything about Sarah. And obviously we learn when we go that far back is that the person that we know of as Sarah wasn't referred to as Sarah at that time. Sarai is what she is mentioned at this point in time. We know that God changes her name and Abraham's name a little later on in the scripture. But we go back, our first mention is Genesis 11 verses 27 through 31. I'll read that to you. This is the genealogy of Terah. And Terah, we'll find out, is the father of Abram or Abraham. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begat Lot, and Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in the Ur of the Chaldeans. You'll think about Abraham, you think about him traveling with Lot in the next few chapters of Genesis, and it starts to make a little more sense. You actually see how Abram was taking care of his nephew Lot because his father had passed. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, and she had no children. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son of Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So right off the bat, what we learn is Sarah is named Sarai at this point. Sarai means my princess. And being the wife of Abram, it's kind of assumed that this is a relational thing with him and her at this point in time. My princess is kind of a term of endearment. Her name means there's a good relationship there. And one of the characteristics that we see of Sarah and Abraham over time is that they do have a good marriage. They seem to have a really good husband and wife relationship. We see that they're from Ur of the Chaldeans. This city is back in the day, was a fairly large city. I saw something that estimated it to be about 60,000. I don't know if that's close or not. Certainly, when you think about little old Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, probably 13 or 14,000, and you think of a city of 60,000 set in this time, that's a pretty large city. It was a city of wealth. It was set on the banks of the Euphrates at that time. It was kind of central between the Mediterranean Sea to the west, and I can't remember which sea it was to the east, but the point there is it was a good place for commerce and kind of a central point for a lot of things. These people were very educated. They were quite business savvy, a lot of different types of businesses in the city. So when you think about Abram and Sarai being raised in this city, it changes your perspective a little bit. They were educated. They were in a fairly modern city growing up. I tend to think about most of these cities and examples in the Bible. I always see these little villages on a hillside. It's probably got 30 people, and that's just not the case. Same thing with education. We don't think about these people having that, ability to be educated or being around that type of thing, but these people were fairly educated and well off. Big point here is Sarai is mentioned right off the start to be barren and without child. So, back to what we read in Hebrews, there's something, big going on. This is an important thing to understand about Sarai. She couldn't have children, and at this point in time, she's a little older in life, and we'll learn a little bit more about that later. Also, Abram's father, Terah, takes his family and leaves Ur of the Chaldeans and is headed towards the land of Canaan. So that's part of the story. They're picking up, taking everything they got, and headed towards the land of Canaan. But he decides at some point to stop and dwell in Haran. And at this point in time, when they leave their homeland and end up in Haran, Abraham's about 70 years old. Abram is. Sarai's known to be about 10 years younger than Abram. So she's about 60 years old. So when you think about that, you think about the fact that you learn of her age, you understand where she's at in life, and that she's barren. It's not really all that surprising at that age. But what we're also learning, that she's never been able to have children. So by the time she's moved and they're in Haran, it's without question that's not going to happen for her. They're spending about 5 years here at this point in the city of Haran. And it's at this point we see in chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, that Abram gets his first promise from God as to the covenant that the Lord's going to bestow upon him. Read verses 1 through 5 of chapter 12. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you." And he's talking about leaving Haran at this point in time. "I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And you shall be a blessing. And I will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you and all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So his father's plan was to go there. They stop in Haran. They stay about 5 years. The Lord comes to Abram and says, "Pick up everything you got, continue your journey, go on to the land of Canaan." And he said, "I'm going to make a great nation out of you." Now, he understood that to be lineage, descendants, just as anybody would. But it said he was 75 years old at this point in time. And we know Sarai's about 65 and is known to have been barren. So, I'm wondering, what did they think about that? What's going through their minds? They're having to pick up again. They'd already moved from their homeland 5 years ago, earlier. Now they're being asked to continue on and move on again to the land of Canaan. What did Abram think? Him and Sarah had a good relationship. They were talking these things through. What did she think? What's going to be my role in this? How can I help? I can't have children. What's the Lord telling us? It would have been a little confusing, I think, at this point in time. But one of the hallmarks of faith is just doing God's will. So what did they do? It says they took all their stuff, took all the people they had acquired, the slaves that they had, animals, all their wealth, everything they owned, and they packed up and they took off. God sends them to the land of Canaan, promises them the land, all of it to Abram's descendants, makes this covenant with him, tells him about the covenant, tells him about the promise, and they don't even have any descendants. So I'm sure it would have been quite interesting to understand exactly what it was that was going through their mind. I guess in some ways, when you think about that, it helps you understand a little bit about how someone can be deemed faithful after a period of service. Our journey here typically has some time to it. How we are judged, how we are viewed in life usually doesn't. You can certainly change how people view you quickly, But to get deemed faithful, respected, honored, those things take a while. And those actions and the way you handle these things that are put in front of you take a while. The next insight we have into Sarai at this point is also in chapter 12. Turn over to about verse 10. And this is what we call the famine and the journey to Egypt. Verse 10, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep and oxen and male donkeys, male and female servants. Remember that female servants comment in a little while. Female donkeys and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here's your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So what we've got here is some deception. And, you know, you've heard there's something in town on some church sign I saw the other day, something about a half-truth is a full lie. You know, the same kind of things going on here. Abram kind of put this together, put it out there, said, hey, you know, they're going to recognize your beauty. This is the first time that we've, you know, been told about Sarah's beauty. And it was a different level of beauty. I mean, when people come to town and they have to pass through a gate or maybe go check in, they probably got some kind of rule or law, and they've got, you know, princes sitting there. People in the military sitting there, and they see a pretty woman. I mean, what do? They recommend her to Pharaoh. It's like, hey, you're coming into our country. You know, you kind of got to live by our rules now. Abram understood this. So he said, look, let's do this. You just tell everybody that you're my sister. And, you know, that way they'll let me live. If they think I'm your husband, they'll kill me just to get to you. And Sarah agreed with this. I don't think it was a wholehearted decision on her part. I think she kind of felt maybe a little arm twisting going on with Abram there. But thinking again about the things we learn about her in this particular instance, she's very beautiful. She's 65 plus at this point in time and still draws the attention of the Pharaoh of Egypt. This is an important characteristic about her. She is faithful. And she obeyed Abram when he asked her to do this. That tells you a little bit about how she thinks and how she acts. She did this even if it meant possibly becoming another man's wife. You know, if something hadn't have intervened, not sure, we're not told exactly how Pharaoh finds out that they were married. I did read something that said Sarah probably told him because she had integrity. Sounded like a pretty reasonable thought to me. But she obeyed Abram. She went along with this, you know, even if it meant being in another man's harem. And that's what she was faced with when this happened. We also learn, again, with everything that took place, Pharaoh giving him things once he realizes that Sarah is Abram's wife, he gives him more things. You know, they are very wealthy at this point. So we learn Sarah's beautiful. Sarah's wealthy. She is still barren. She's getting older. Yet again, later in chapter 15, God promises Abram that his heirs will come from his own body. Now, Abrams understands that. There's nothing that says Abram can't have descendants. It's all about Sarai. But again, when you think about this promise and God continuing to let Abram know about his covenant that's coming up, how do they react to this? What do Abram and what does Sarai do? How do they approach this? They're still talking about it. They're lying there after supper and they're thinking, man, what does the Lord mean? From your body, this promise, and here I am, I'm 65 plus, I can't have children. Where are we going with all this? Chapter 16, I kind of wrote the doubting couple here. I think they're trying to figure out how they'll do their part in God's plan in some way, trying to come together and understand, what it is God wants and what they can do. Verses 1 through 4, chapter 16. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant. Remember I said, think about that term, the Egyptian. I think this is probably one of the slaves that Pharaoh gave them because he found out that she was married and he wanted them to leave, and he gave them all that stuff. An Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, "See now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. After Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she, Hagar, saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. So Sarah puts another plan together. She's going to take this Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. I assume this was one that she was pretty close to. She probably thought a lot of her, especially if she's going to offer her to her husband as a wife. She convinces Abram that he should conceive a child with Hagar, saying, "See now, the Lord has restrained me." I think she's kind of, in a sense, blaming the Lord. He did not let me have a child. There must be another plan. That's the only thing I can figure out. She shows that she's lost patience. She's lost faith. She's not perfect. And I think those are important characteristics to understand about Sarah. At the end, Hagar conceives. She has a son named Ishmael. And again, not trying to run off into too much about Abram or Abraham. We'll just leave it with that. She has a son named Ishmael. And at this point in time, Abram is 86 years old, and Sarai is 76 years old. And there is some jealousy and contention between her and Hagar. Gives you a little bit more insight into Sarai's personality. We get to chapter 17. We actually see more of the actual covenant with Abram. He's 99 years old at this point in time. 13 years have passed since the birth of Ishmael, making him 13 years old himself. The Lord appears to Abram, reaffirms his promise, changes his name to Abraham. And this is the point at which the covenant actually begins. He also changes Sarai's name to Sarah, and the meaning goes from my princess to just princess. So we see a more, I guess, universal acknowledgement of her being special when the Lord changed her name to what is shown as princess. It also still means to me, with him including her, changing her name, she's still part of the plan, the part of this covenant that is unfolding with Abraham at this time, even at the age of 89. So they're still trying to figure this out. Verse 15, the Lord tells Abraham, as far as Sarai, Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her. I will also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. King of peoples shall be from her. Again, what do you think Abraham now's reaction is? You know, he's old, she's old. They're still, really not understanding this. In chapter 17, verse 17, then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. So again, God confirms Isaac. He confirms Isaac's coming from Sarah. Although Abraham is still not completely understanding because he thinks this is kind of funny and can't understand it, he does follow through with his part in the covenant. It said that at that very day, Abraham took Ishmael, all the men of his house, whether slave or part of his family, and they all became circumcised as part of the covenant as God had them to do. So maybe a little doubtful, still following what God wants them to do, not quite understanding. Now that's kind of typical probably for how we address things in our life sometimes. Maybe how we're supposed to address them. Doesn't mean we're going to understand everything fully day one or right up front. God just says keep marching. Just keep doing what I tell you. You'll understand one day. And that's what we see Abraham and Sarah doing as well. Chapter 18, we see again some doubts come to light. Verses 1 through 8 of chapter 18, we see a situation where Abraham is being visited by the Lord. There were three men. It says one of them's the Lord. It seems like the other two may be angels, perhaps. There's a couple of different thoughts there. They're actually going towards Sodom, and they stop to visit with Abraham. And if you read the story about Abraham and this particular thing, Abraham bargains with them about, trying to find righteous people in Sodom so it wouldn't be destroyed. But these three, the Lord and these two, it seems, were on their way to Sodom to see what was amiss there. They affirm again the things that are about to take place with Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. And in verse 9, Sarah picks back up, and it says, then they said to him, talking about the three men, where is Sarah your wife? So he said, here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Now you could stop right there and have quite a lesson on how faith and remembering the promises of God are. God says, is there anything too hard for me? We should think about that every time we doubt, because the answer is no. If God says he's going to do it, he's faithful to do it. There's nothing that he can't do. And he's trying to remind them, I do things in my own way, in my own time. Just keep doing what I ask you to do. At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So, she tried to crawl out of that one a little bit. And the Lord said, no, you laughed. I guess just reminding her that he was all-knowing and letting her know where she stood. She laughs, she doubts, the Lord scorns in a sense. Sarah lies in a sense, laughing and was afraid. I say those things again just to think about her personality. Are we seeing a perfect woman here? Certainly not. We're seeing someone just like us that doubts and struggles and fabricates things and doesn't always understand. And I think that's important because she made the list. She was in Hebrews chapter 11. And I think, we can use that as a good example of how you don't have to be perfect to be faithful and to be a good Christian and to be a good example. Chapter 20, not going to get in a whole lot, but Abraham and Abimelech's the story here. Very similar circumstances to what took place with Pharaoh as they went into Egypt. They repeated the deception. Abraham says to, again, Sarai's how old at this time? Is it, last I think I remember was 90. And they're about to go into this new city, and the king Abimelech, and Abraham says, man, they're going to, you're a looker. They're going to come after you, and they're going to kill me for you. Same old thing, same story. Abimelech takes her because he thinks it's a sister, not a wife. God intervenes in this one in a dream, lets Abimelech know he's about to marry another man's wife. Verse 12 says, but indeed she is truly my sister. And this is Abraham after Abimelech comes to him, explaining to him what the circumstances are. He says, but indeed she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became a wife. So, what we find out here is that they are half brother and half sister. That Sarai is the daughter of Abram's father. So, again, I guess what I took out of that, they should have learned better. They just keep doing it. So again, they're not perfect. They've been playing this game for a long time now. So every time they go on vacation, they got to lie, tell somebody it's their sister. Not quite understanding the plan. Chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. The Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. When God said he would do it, he did it. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, who Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abram circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded. Now Abram was 100 years old, and his son Isaac was born to him. That put Sarah at 90. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham and Sarah that they would nurse children? For I would have borne him a son in his old age. She got Abraham at 100, Sarah at 90. Verse 23, I'm going to have to speed it up just a little here. We have the account of Sarah's death. She dies at the age of 127. Abraham's 137. Isaac's 37. Throw this out there real quick. When you think about Abraham and Isaac, you always think about a young child that Abraham took up to sacrifice. And I think he was a little older than that. So there was a little bit of obedience and submission probably with Isaac as well. Sarah dies in Hebron. She went back to Hebron. It's interesting to look up why she was in Hebron and Abraham wasn't with her at her death. There's some interesting thoughts there. She could have been sick, looking for a better place, better air quality, better temperature, less allergies. Could have been setting up a new place they were going to live. They decided to move back to Hebron. It's also said that maybe Abraham had asked her to go off while he dealt with this thing God asked him to do with his son Isaac, he didn't want her around when he had to do what he had to do. We don't know, but she was buried there in the cave of the field of Machpelah in Hebron in the land of Canaan. An interesting fact: the only woman in the Bible whose age at death and burial place are given is Sarah. It's the only one we know about. What was Sarah like? what words came to mind after hearing your story. I probably read a little bit more than I was able to get out here tonight, but I'm going to throw quite a few words out there because I think all of these at some point sum up Sarah. Blessed, beautiful, smart, wealthy, experienced, traveler, faithful, believing, yet doubting, good sense of humor, crafty, princess, loved, loving, barren, companion, submissive, repentant, realistic, trusting, old, patient, yet impatient, tested, jealous, mother, buried, example, free, and promised. That's a pretty extensive list, but pretty powerful when you think about those things. She lived a life that's been a great example. Not perfect by any means, but something that we should certainly all pattern our lives around. I'd say read Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 through 31 tonight before you go to bed. It's an interesting story about Paul. Paul uses Sarah and Hagar here to kind of describe the two covenants. Hagar is alluded to in the sense of the Sinaitic covenant, the law given to Moses. Hagar was a failure in a sense of Abram's and Sarai's, and Ishmael was part of that failure. And he compares them to the covenant that was given to Moses based on the fact that no man could follow that. We know that we couldn't live up to that law. But he uses Sarah and Abraham and Isaac as a way to talk about Christ and Christian living, and how through providence and his plan we have something that works for us all. In conclusion, don't have but a few more minutes. I'm just going to say these quickly. God will do what he's promised. We learn that, we see that, we know that. God uses imperfect people. Abraham and Sarah are good examples of that. God accomplishes his will in his way. Sarah tried to do it her way. That wasn't what God asked for or wanted. God is always faithful. God desires our obedience. God's timing is not our timing. His way is always the right way, and the time is always the right time. And God's word points to Jesus. The author of Hebrews referred to Sarah's faith as a model for us. He said, by faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. And finally, Sarah in the Bible did not follow God perfectly, nor do we. Yet her example confirms God's sovereignty in all situations, even when they may seem completely beyond our control. Thank you guys for coming. That gets us through our 13-week studies of our patriarchs. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.